Okay, so let's make this next one a you try. So if you will, pause the video, give this next one your best shot, and then we'll come back and look at it together. Okay, so this cone we have this time is upside down, and I hope that didn't throw you off as far as finding the elements that we need for this formula. We need a radius, we know, and so that goes from the center of the circle base out to the rim of the circle. Okay, so in this case, our radius is 16. And then the other piece of information we need is the slant height. And we know the slant height is always going to be on the side of the cone. Regular height, this is regular height here, is the 30. That goes down the middle. Okay, so if this L is our slant height, and this, we'll make it green, this guy is our regular height, we can see that together these form a nice yellow right triangle. And we know when we know two sides of a right triangle, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put this 16 here so that it's a little more clear where that 16 actually belongs. We know when we know two sides of a right triangle and we need to find the third side, we use a good old Pythagorean theorem. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And as you're working this problem, 16 squared plus 30 squared. We know L will go in the C spot because that's the hypotenuse of that right triangle. You might have noticed that 16 and 30 are they're a multiple of 2 times one of our favorite triples. It's a 8, 15, 17. So if 8 times 2 is 16 and 15 times 2 is 30, it should be, when we work out the Pythagorean theorem, that the hypotenuse comes out to be 34. But let's just go ahead and see what it comes out to be. Okay, so we know that 30 squared is 900, and we know that 16 squared is 256. Oh, I left off my squared on my L. So 256 plus 900 gives us 1,156. And then we're going to take the square root of both sides in order to get L by itself, and then we get 34, sure enough. So our slant height is 34, so we can put that in the formula now. So far we have pi times, we said our radius was 16, times our slant height is 34, plus, now I'm coming over here, pi times my radius squared. And you know what? I know our instructions up here said round it to the nearest tenth, but I'm actually going to leave this one in terms of pi because I'm pretty sure there's one in your Math Excel homework tonight where you're going to need to leave it in terms of pi. So let's just take a look at what that would look like. Okay, so if you were going to leave it in terms of pi instead of rounding it to the nearest tenth, that means you multiply together all the numbers and leave pi alone, right? So 16 times 34 comes out to 544. And then I'm just going to put that pi at the end there. Plus, we already found out that 16 squared is 256. And again, just put that pi down there at the end. And then you treat that pi like a variable, just combine like terms. And so 544 plus 256 gives us 800 pi meters squared. So if it asks you in your Math Excel to leave in terms of pi, that's how you would do that. You just leave the pi. You never press the pi button in your calculator, is what that means. Okay, let's look at one more example. For the exercises below, round to the nearest tenth. Find the surface area of a cone. So surface area of a cone, good old pi r times slant height plus pi r squared. If the height, so that's not slant height, that's regular height, equals 10, and the slant height equals 14. Okay, so I like to just go ahead and draw a picture of our cone just to see what it is exactly that we're dealing with. We know that the actual height is the one that goes up the middle. It's perpendicular to the base, so that's where we put our 10. And that our slant height is this 14 over here. And when we go to put these, this is our L and this is our H. And when we go to put these in our formula, let's take a look at what happens. We have pi times, we don't know our radius. We do know slant height is 14 times 14 plus pi times radius squared. Interesting, because they gave us an H, but they didn't give us R. And this formula nowhere asks for a height, but it does need the radius in order to find out this amount for the surface area. And so what they want you to do, guys, is draw in your own radius on this circle base, but don't just draw it anywhere. Conveniently draw it connecting the height and the slant height, because if you draw your R right there, look at what it does. We have a right triangle again. And so once again, we can come off to our side work, because we know when we know two sides of a right triangle and we don't know the other side, we can do good old Pythagorean theorem. So here we go. We're going to say 10 squared. Remember, R will go either in the A or the B spot. It doesn't matter, but C has to be 14 because that's our hypotenuse. Hypotenuse always goes in the C spot, right? So 10 squared we know to be 100 plus R squared equals 196 is what 14 squared is. Subtract 100 from both sides and we get R squared to be 196. Then to get R by itself, we take the square root of both sides. And I'm going to show you a fancy little trick here. I'm going to leave this. Normally we would put this in our calculator and we would get the square root of 196 as a decimal. But I'm not actually going to do that today. Oh, Miss Benton. Whoops. It's 96, not 196, silly. I'm going to leave it as the square root of 96 because there's a neat little thing that happens over here. Okay, so now we have our R. Now we can go back to our formula. And so we said this was pi times square root 96 times 14, just plugging in that R, plus pi times square root 96 for my R. But remember, that's squared. So you might remember that square roots and squaring things are opposite of each other. And so they cancel each other out. And so what happens here is we really have pi times square root 96 times 14 plus plain old pi times 96. Now this one we are going to do to the nearest tenth. It would be pretty ugly to do in terms of pi with that square root 96. So let's hop over to the calculator and see what that looks like. Okay, so remember we were doing pi times square root second and the x squared button 96. Then remember you have to press the right arrow button to get out from underneath the square root times 14. Then we're going to do a plus pi times 96. And to the nearest tenth, let's take a look. 732.52. Remember, we'll go to the tenths place, which is the 5. It's 2 next door, which is less than 5, so it'll be 732.5 for our final answer. And that will be meters squared.